Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Before we do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to the folks at Pega for sponsoring my podcast for the coming month. You see, it's almost time for Pega World Inspire, the annual conference from Pegasystems. Join them online for free on June the 2nd from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time to learn how the world's most impactful companies are driving digital transformation, which is much, much more important than ever in this COVID-19 age. They'll have compelling keynotes, demos, and case studies in a highly interactive virtual format and a few surprises as well. Go to pegaworld.com to find out more, to register for free, and to check out the full agenda. I've been lucky enough to have attended the last several Pega Worlds in person, and I can't recommend them highly enough, so go register today. That's pegaworld.com. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that for now. Let's get back into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Lauren Curry, who is the CEO and co-founder of Stride. Hey, Lauren, how are you doing?
Hi, Adrian. I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, great to have you on the show. So, Lauren, for the benefit of some of our listeners and readers who may not know kind of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also a bit about the work that you do?
Of course, I'd love to. So, I'm a designer by background and craft. I set up one of the UK's first service design consultancies in Scotland and ran that for 6-7 years, focused on the public sector. And since then, I've built various initiatives and businesses. Right now, my focus is on Stride, which I know we're going to talk about a bit in this conversation today. And my other business is called Upfront, and that's all about changing confidence and public speaking. I'm a trustee on 2 boards for the Design Council and Pregnant Then Screwed, so maternity discrimination charity.
Cool. Also, one thing I noticed that we shared is that we both went to Dundee University.
Oh, I love Dundee. It's one of my most favourite cities. The sunniest city in the UK.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Blimey. So anyway, as a bit of an aside, I'll share something. So I studied sort of economics up there. Were you at which part? Were you at the kind of, what was the art school that got folded into kind of the university?
Yeah, so my degree was product design engineering. So it was half the art school and half the university.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, and another kind of like a piece of kind of local knowledge. Do you remember the Phoenix pub?
I do.
I used to work there.
Well, I used to work in the Invercars on the Perth Road.
Brilliant. Anyway, let's not get into that because we'll end up getting to sort of drinking kind of like yes. stories. And that's, if there's anything we know about being at Dundee in that university college sort of thing, there's a lot of drinking that goes on.
It's interesting though, because I really do think that there's such a strong link between like hospitality, bartending and waitressing and service design, customer experience stuff. Like I'm
completely
invested in the relationship. So it's I don't think it's a coincidence that we're both now talking about what we're talking about, and we had this job.
Exactly. Anyway, we can come back to drink later if it takes our fancy. But you've recently founded this new company called Stride. Which is it's on this kind of like a mission to democratise leadership development. I mean, which sounds like a massive thing. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what it aims to do and why you think it's needed?
Yeah, so we're building Stride to transform and make better how people learn to lead. So when we talk about democratising leadership development, I want to share with you a statistic. So the average age that you are when you have your first leadership development training experience is 42. Okay, wow. The average age of a first-time leader is 30. And we've got young professionals today where we know that development opportunities is the number one reason that they choose one job over the other. It's the most asked for work benefit. So what that shows us is that there's a huge leadership gap, and that is what we are building Stride to close that gap. So when we look at existing leadership development programs, tools, methods that exist today, they're expensive and they don't scale, and often they're reserved for the senior managers, the people that are at the top of organizations, and those people are predominantly male, white, middle-aged, middle class. So we've got a problem there. Then, these one-off, one-day, two-day programs can't scale for teams that are geographically dispersed. And of course, we've both been in lockdown for several weeks now, but even prior to COVID, working at home has grown by 140% since 2005. So all of that means that the existing service model isn't fit for purpose anymore. The data shows us that training, kind of classroom style training, has really low impact. I think the stat is trainees forget 70% of what they're taught within 24 hours of the workshop.
Yeah.
And then when you start to look at the more technical solutions that exist, most of the solutions that are on the market just now are enterprise solutions, and they're designed for HR departments. So they are very static, very top down, definitely not very beautiful, and not very easy to use. So all of that means that we believe that there's a big gap and a huge opportunity to build Stride that is a beautiful personal companion that lives in your pocket and helps you develop as a leader at your pace in a way that works for you.
Cool. I mean, because I think the thing that strikes me as well is that we're also going to get, and we've seen kind of this come out when, as we go through this virus outbreak and kind of the lockdown and everything that's associated with that, is how, people still don't really understand that there is a world outside large organizations, and kind of this side of leadership and learning applies to, all types of firms and all types of people. So what I wanted to do is kind of, before you actually kind of get kind of stuck into kind of understanding a bit more about this, is can you define for me what you see as leadership and what it means to you? Because that feels like a word that gets thrown about, being leadership, and then there's all these kind of images of connotations that get thrown up in our minds. But let's kind of start by kind of you telling me kind of like, what do you think it means and why it means that to you? If that's okay.
It's an excellent question, because you're right, it's such a nebulous word. But if you Google the word leadership, you get 479 million results, like all these different definitions. So I think, which actually is also part of what Stride is about, is simplifying that noise. But to get back to your question, I think I can start confidently with what it's not. So, I don't think that leadership has got anything to do with seniority or the position you have in a company. It's not linked to your job title. And as you say, there's all these unhelpful connotations. I think it's important to know that leadership is not about your personal attributes. It's not about being domineering or very charming. It's not or extroverted, it's not an adjective. Being those things doesn't mean that you would naturally lead or be a good leader. And I think it's also different from management. A lot of these conversations I'm having is with people I'm learning that leadership and management get very confused, and people don't always recognize that they're not synonymous. So I think that's an important part of it. And then if we say, okay, well, what is it? I think it's about creating conditions for people to thrive,
right,
and choose new behaviors, new actions to create good. So and I think it's that ability that can determine the survival or demise of teams and organizations, whether it's a local community group or an entire nation or the Parent Teachers Association. There are leaders in those groups that are agents of change, and they help that group organize themselves and behave in a way that brings out the best of the group, that will ultimately make things better, transform people's lives, or solve a problem. Or
yes,
so it's about influence. I think it's about social influence.
Okay. And so how does the app kind of like work? Because I think this is the mechanisms of it is kind of like it's the thing that intrigues me. The whole learning and kind of like creating the right conditions for people to thrive and perform and things, and to facilitate that kind of whole process, and it not being about hierarchy and authority, and it's not about title and things. It's about individuals, and then I guess the roles that they end up growing into, or the things that they take on in many ways. So I guess my question would be is like, when you think about that, the leadership development side of things, and that thinking of it, like, I'm intrigued by how the app works to do that, given that you want to democratize it and sort of push that thinking out to the edges, as it were.
Absolutely. So we're creating a platform for leadership development that teaches the core skills for becoming a good leader in a collaborative environment. And we're doing that by applying a new learning format that's based on mobile first, personalization, bite-sized content, all in a very learn by doing context. So we can split it up into 3 buckets. So the first bucket of functionality is lectures.
Okay. So
as a Stride user, you will listen to lectures around, like, let's say one of our first modules is around feedback. So the lectures split up into 3-4 minute chunks of audio that you can listen to, or text that you can read. And that content is created by leadership development experts, and then our content design team turn it into very plain English, accessible, easy to digest words. And then the second bucket is around functionalities around assessments and assignments.
Right.
So this is the key to helping people understand the progress that they're making and what areas of themselves and their knowledge they should focus on. So one of the first parts of the customer experience in Stride is the initial moments of using the product. You go through what we call like a mini leadership style assessment.
Right.
And that asks you a bunch of questions, and then it holds up a mirror to you to say, okay, Adrian, we can see that you are a predominantly you use a very facilitative style of leadership, and this works really well in teams that are ABC, but it doesn't work well in teams that are XYZ. Therefore, we think the first module you should listen to is
right.
to be a good listener, or whatever that might be. And then the assignments are the learn by doing part. So after you've listened to a lecture, you get an assignment, almost like a piece of homework, a task that you have to go and do away from the app to apply what you've learned. And then we encourage the user to come back and tell us, what worked, what didn't work. Let's do some reflection on how that assignment went.
Right.
Differently next time. And then the third bit, which is definitely the most interesting, fascinating, and most difficult, is the piece around how you build habits. So how we help people change their behavior. And that functionality is about stickiness, like how we make people continually use the product to build up those habits. So it might be daily reflections, it might be daily prompts, it might be journaling. There's a whole bunch of functionality on our roadmap, but that's what that bit's about. It's like, now you've got the knowledge and now you've tried it out, how do you make that a habit?
Yeah.
And then,
sorry, go ahead.
And then the last piece is kind of what that looks like for organizations, because Stride becomes powerful when you think about it in the context of teams inside organizations, and it's designed to make learning social. So, the peer input can help users identify their blind spots, and it's what's known as the network effect. So it's like the more people who use the product inside an organization, the smarter the product will become on that organization's context.
Okay. And so, because you talked about assessment, and then you talked about strengths and things, and you talked about sort of and trying to understand kind of what sort of style you're of leader you are. I mean, is it sort of, how are you kind of dealing with the kind of the promotion of or advancement of any particular leadership kind of like model or style, or are you staying completely agnostic on that, or how are you covering that? I guess that's my question that comes to that. It's like, how are you covering that, Lauren?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we get asked a lot, because I think part of what creates the kind of noise and elitism that we've described previously is the fact that there are so many different opinions and so many multiple models and theories. So we are very strong in our stance of being agnostic. We don't want to promote a specific leadership method. The one model that we use in our assessment is called the situational leadership model, and that's because we believe that leadership is situational. It's about where you are and the people that you're with. So yeah, that's our stance on that.
Okay, I mean that's kind of a, I think that's good to hear, because I think there is a lot of, the big thing now is authentic leadership, which is a rebranding of or some sort of like, heroic leadership, or kind of whatever it was called before, which is the cult of the celebrity CEO in many kind of ways, and it's kind of flawed in its kind of like premise in many ways, but it still kind of gets rolled out. But I think you're absolutely right, is that the situational sort of side of things is kind of where you see kind of real leaders kind of thrive. But I guess we're actually in the middle of a situation right now as well, where we've got the coronavirus outbreak. We're kind of like currently in lockdown, and many people are having to work in changed conditions, including kind of remote working and stuff. And it seems to me that the style of leadership or the requirements of leadership is changing. And actually, we probably need more people being leaders more than ever in many ways, in both a group perspective, but also as an individual perspective, because leadership starts with leading oneself, I believe.
I think you're right, and we're getting emails from organizations every day who are asking for our help on how can we help our team leaders and our directors adjust to this new environment, with a very specific context. This is not all of a sudden everybody's working from home. This is all of a sudden we're working from home during a global pandemic. Those two things are very different things.
Sure.
And I think a big part of what I'm seeing is that leaders who probably beforehand were able to hide and weren't necessarily exposed in a way that would mean their peers and their seniors could see
Yeah.
how they're leading.
Yeah.
And now that is being seen and being noticed, what people is not, doesn't look good. So
Sure.
I think that's part of it.
I mean, and what do you think? What are you kind of seeing and hearing about what kind of like leaders need to be doing more of and kind of doing less of as a result of the coronavirus kind of outbreak? I mean, because I think that's kind of it. It's I think the effects are going to persist, and therefore but it's interesting. It'd be interesting to hear kind of what you're seeing or observing. What you think? Oh, we should turn up the volume of that, and then turn down the volume of that, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is trust or lack of. So I think, leaders who are adjusting and thriving as best they can are putting a huge amount of trust in themselves and their people.
Right.
And I think leaders who are trying to hold on to this kind of top-down command and control timesheets, it's just not feasible anymore. And I think that's a lot of where problems are starting to come, where people are applying the kind of models models and ways of being and doing that worked in a command and control physical environment and trying to apply them to a remote context, work. And then, the other big theme that I'm seeing and feel excited about is the pattern we can see, the gender differences we can see in how leaders of the world are responding to this. So, when we look at countries like Germany, Taiwan, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Norway, these leaders are giving us a very different and very attractive way of wielding power, and they're doing it in different ways. So I think Sanna Martin in particular is like the youngest head of state ever, the Prime Minister of Finland.
Yes,
he's been using social media in really powerful ways to battle the virus. And then we had the Prime Minister of Norway held a television broadcast so that she could talk directly to children and take their questions and tell them the truth and ease their fears. And that's so feels like that's exists on a different planet compared to some of the leadership we're seeing in the UK and the US. So I think I'm hoping that this will wake organizations up to the strength and power of this more feminine way of leading, and that we hire that way and we elect more that way.
Sure. I think I think that what's absolutely true is something like this. It shines. It brings out the best and the worst of us.
Yeah.
And it shines spotlights on both things, and you just cannot hide. It's like warts and all, and it does kind of like these things do show up, and the good and the great examples are luminous.
Yeah, it's a nice word.
So I mean, so here's the thing, Lauren. Is like, so I generally focus on, things to do with, all things to do with how do we kind of deliver a better service or better experience, or how do we build organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their employees and things. And I also kind of know that when listening to this, thinking about these things, and also kind of my audience is that I also know that boiling things down to simple advice and first steps is kind of really important. And all the stuff that the conversation is interesting. But if I was to say to you, you have to tell my audience, based on kind of your experience, you've built a bunch of different kind of companies, done a bunch of different things, and you're getting now, on a mission to democratize leadership development and all these things you're seeing around leadership and things. If you were to say, point the finger, do this one thing, or get good at this one thing, what would it be?
Listening.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Listen harder, folks. Listen better.
Yeah, and I think it's, to expand on that a little, it's about, I just think companies are still not listening to their employees and their customers.
Yeah.
And, I think there's been so many examples, from Sports Direct and that awful letter that the CEO wrote to their staff to the other end of the scale, where the CEO of Timpson's has used, as you said, been a luminous example. And then a more public example of Universal Credit, a service that has been fundamentally flawed and broken since day one, but yet now it's been taken seriously for the first time because the middle and upper classes are having to access that service. And I think how you avoid those things is by bringing your customers into your boardroom, into your customer experience team, into your decisions, and really, really listening, not in a tokenistic, we put a survey out or we created a focus group. It's like deeply listening, especially when what your customer represents is uncomfortable.
Yes.
And is challenging probably a lot of the systemic beliefs that you hold true about the world, whether that's linked to class or gender or race. I think it's these things that need to be looked at, and as you say, like have the light shone on them so that organizations can serve everybody and meet everybody where they are.
I think one of the challenges with that is that we may end up getting to the point that some people need to fire themselves.
Absolutely.
and that's going to require a level of honesty and a degree of discomfort that is going to be very real for a lot of people. But I think you're absolutely spot on. But let me kind of like I know that you're in the middle of fundraising and all that sort of stuff, and you've got to prepare for important calls kind of coming up. So I won't take up a lot more of your time, Lauren, but I just kind of wanted to ask you a couple of quick kind of wrap up questions that switching gears a little bit. You've been in service design and building things and working from the outside in for the longest time. From all the way back in kind of Dundee, is like, what do you think the future of service kind of looks like? If you were to think forward, what does it look like? What are kind of some of the big things that you think are maybe the challenges or the key success characteristics are going to be of of organizations that are going to get it right? Because it's hard to predict that it's going to be X or Y or Z.
Yeah.
What are the things? What are going to be the common threads and the common themes that you think are going to be that the organizations, the successful organizations of the future, they're just going to have them, or they're going to have them in abundance?
Yeah. It's a lovely question, and one that I pondered a lot, because it's so easy to go to the there'll be the technical, what AI is going to do to self-service checkouts. But really, I think it's the biggest thing for me is culture.
Right.
And what I mean when I say that is, I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this will be running organizations, building companies, building products, building services. And what most of us do, which is a very, natural and normal instinct, is we obsess over that thing that we're creating. So right. What is it? Who is it for? How will we measure success? How are we going to get it built? How can we get it built faster? How can we get it built cheaper? Who does it add value to? All these questions around the what thing. And actually what we need to do is focus on the how.
Right.
It's the how that enables you to build your what. So the how is, how do we show up every day? How do we talk to each other? How do we give each other feedback? How do we talk to our customers?
Yeah.
How do we treat people who leave our organization? How do we give each other feedback? How do we tell our story? You know, the invisible parts of how people work together is that's the most important product, because that's the product you use to make every single thing that your company or your organization does. And I think organizations who recognize that and invest in their culture very intentionally and purposefully will ultimately, they are far more likely to achieve their goals than a company that does not. And, you know, I think there's, you know, famous examples like Patagonia, where, you know, we can read whole books on how intentional they've been about designing their culture, to, you know, a recent scandal from the startup, I think it's called Away, that makes luxury travel gear. You know, their leadership team got it wrong, and they were, you know, trying to impose a culture on people instead of, you know, recognizing that culture is something that's co-created. So I think, I mean, that's more of a wish and a hope. Like I feel like it's shifting. If I'm honest, from my vantage point, I can see that happening in the public sector more than I can in the private sector right now in the UK, which is interesting. I think in the US it's slightly different, where the private sector is much more advanced on, you know, culture as a thing that we dedicate a slice of our budget to. They have people in the organisations where it's their sole job to kind of be that guardian or champion of culture. And then the challenges, you know, what makes that hard is that we are working and operating in a system that isn't fit for purpose anymore. You know, it was designed for the predominantly, you know, the white male elite who have a 9 to 5 and a workforce that await instruction.
Well, sure. It was designed for the industrial age.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you're right. I think but I think there's you know, there's a difference between people that kind of have this industrial age sort of like a legacy of industrial age kind of thinking, and they think that things are, you know, you kind of you dole out instructions and then it becomes so. But actually there's a reality, which is you need to create the conditions for things to emerge and to thrive. Like culture isn't something that you create. Culture is like stuff that people do. And you've got to almost create the system conditions and the right system conditions for the right culture to emerge.
I think it's the byproduct of your behavior, right? So it's like if we take the last 50 days and calculate an average of how we've behaved together, that's our culture. Like whether we've got a PowerPoint deck that says something different doesn't mean bugger all, really, because that it's about how you behave day to day.
I think so somebody kind of like said something, I can't remember who it was, but it's related to brand and reputation, and also going to be kind of transposed over to kind of culture, where somebody says you're kind of like, your brand is about your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And it's the same thing with culture. I think it's like, it's what people do when none of their bosses and managers are around. You know, that's kind of like how people show up. You know, that's the reality. So you're not forced to do it. Individually and collectively, you're making a choice to do something because you believe it's the right thing to do.
One of my most favourite questions that I can share with your audience to think about this is, what is the behaviour that is most rewarded in your team meetings? And I always love that question, because when you think about I just think it's a great question, and that the answer to that tells you a huge amount about a company's culture.
Absolutely. Oh, a great question. So anyway, one final thing, just to finish off on a bit of a turn the tables a little bit. I've been doing before this call, I explained to you about I published this book called Punk CX, and I've been doing this ongoing piece of social research, like word association, brand association sort of game, as it were, if you like. And what I wanted to ask you was, if I was to ask you to pick one or two words that you think would describe a more punk approach to sort of service or experience, organizational outcomes, that sort of stuff, what would you say?
Rebellious.
Perfect. And secondly, if I was to say, what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of punk ethos, what would you say?
So the company that I've been most inspired by this year is a company called Gravity Payments.
Dan Price, legend.
So Dan Price, I mean, I guess you know the story,
yeah,
based on your enthusiastic response. So he cut his £1 million salary so that every single member of his staff could get paid £70,000 a year.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, we've got all the data on the absolute tremendously positive impact that's had on this entire organization.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really bold example of what it looks like when you acknowledge and accept that all of these rules that we play in business, whether it's building them, scaling them, sustaining them, all of these rules are completely made up.
Sure.
They are all up for debate, up for challenge, and some of them, as Dan showed, are up for completely breaking. Like I just read Dame Stephanie Shirley's autobiography. If you've not read it, you would really love it, Adrian. So she set up a tech company from her dining room table with like £6, and now she's one of the, something like 50 years later, she's one of the richest women in the country. It's an incredible story. But the part of it that's relevant to your punk question is she set up that company based on, she was a new mum with a son with autism.
Right.
Was a very talented progressive computer developer, and she couldn't understand why there was all these very talented senior women stuck at home looking after children who could program computers, and all of these big computer software companies, and they couldn't work there. So she built a company that was based on, you work when you can work at home as long as you get the job done. And that was totally revolution, total revolution in those days. People laughed her out rooms because they thought she was completely bonkers to suggest such a thing. And following her journey of being constantly challenged against something that for her was just complete common sense. Of course it's common sense, and now it is common sense, but
sure,
if we go back in time, it wasn't. And it made me think, what's our equivalent of that today on the 16th of April in 2020? Like who's really breaking new ground, and how we structure organizations and what we build them for. And
do you know that actually I've got to double confirm this, but I've heard that Dan Price, through this kind of outbreak sort of thing, and that they've had to potentially having to furlough a bunch of kind of people in order to pay for that. He's reduced everything. He's taken it out of the company down to zero to help pay for all of that sort of stuff.
Of course he has.
And that's kind of like, we'd expect him to do that.
Yeah.
Because that's just the way that he does it. But also the other thing that you're absolutely right. Somebody's kind of said kind of once is the thing that we have to remember is that the idea, whether it's the art or science of management, is something that's been invented by human beings.
Yeah.
And given that we made it, we can unmake it and then remake it. Mm-hmm. And so you're absolutely right, because otherwise we kind of get to the point, this is the way it should be done, and you're like going, no, it's not. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Lauren, that's been super fascinating. And I just want to, first of all, say that, when this is all kind of done, we should have a Dundee reunion and kind of like have a drink because
We should.
Why not? But congratulations on kind of what you're trying to do with kind of like Stride and also the other stuff that you do. I think it's all brilliant. I think the idea about opening up this democratizing kind of like leadership and how there's a massive requirement for everybody to kind of to grow their own leader in themselves is essential round about now. But finally, I just want to say it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing your time and your insight kind of with us. That's been great.
Oh, thank you. I was honoured to be invited. So, thank you.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.